The cold over England that morning felt like it had teeth. Lieutenant Jack Halverston stood alone beside his P-51D Mustang, the sleek fuselage still beaded with dew, the smell of fuel and wet metal hanging in the air. The mechanics moved around him, warming engines, tuning superchargers, tightening access panels. But Jack barely registered their footfalls. His eyes were locked on the small silver canister mounted just behind the firewall, a feature no German intelligence report had yet caught on to, and that too many American pilots still dismissed as an afterthought. Water injection. A stupid trick, some had called it. A gimmick, others said. But Jack knew better. He'd felt it the day before Berlin, when the emergency power surged through the Merlin like anger unleashed. It was no gimmick. It was the only reason he was still breathing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He pulled on his gloves, cracked leather creaking in the icy dawn. Captain Rourke strolled up beside him, the red scarf at his neck flapping lazily in the wind. "You look like you're about to confess something," Rourke said. "Or commit something." Jack gave a thin smile. "Just thinking." "That's dangerous," Rourke replied. "Especially for a pilot." Jack shook his head, but didn't answer. His mind kept returning to the briefing, to the maps, heavy with red arrows converging over Berlin. Rumors swirled about Me-262s, Germany's Silver Lightning. Jets, faster than anything the Allies had brought to the sky. Some pilots claimed they saw them slice through formations and vanish before a Mustang could even react. Others insisted they were temperamental, fragile, predictable. But everyone agreed on one thing. No piston-engine aircraft could outrun a 262, unless, Jack thought, they hadn't met a Mustang running wet. 2 days earlier, a squadron mate named Hawkins had mocked the contraption, tapping the water tank with a screwdriver. "This is what's supposed to save our hides, a bucket of glorified tap water." His grin had faded once Jack pulled away from him in a near-vertical dive. The water-methanol mixture feeding the Merlin good, cold density, pushing manifold pressure beyond its sane limits. Jack still remembered the acceleration pressing him into the seat, the sensation of the world narrowing to a spear point of speed. Stupid trick. No, it was the ace up his sleeve. He climbed into the cockpit now, sinking into the worn seat, the smell of oil and rubber mingling with the faint scent of the notebook pages he kept tucked in his flight jacket. In those pages were sketches, diagrams of fuel routes, coolant passages, airflow paths, notes he'd written long before he'd ever sat behind a Mustang stick. His father had been a mechanic, the kind who could take apart a tractor engine and reassemble it before lunch. Jack never planned to live under the hood like him, but engines fascinated him just the same. Not the grease, but the harmony, the way power felt like a promise, made real. He flicked the battery switch, and the cockpit hummed to life. Rourke climbed into his own Mustang, parked wingtip to wingtip, and gave Jack a thumbs up. Jack returned it. Propellers cracked the morning stillness as 12 P-51s wound up into a chorus of controlled fury. Their exhaust plumes drifted sideways in long blue ribbons as ground crews signaled them forward. Jack pushed the throttle to taxi power, feeling the Mustang roll with smooth confidence. On the runway, the squadron lined up in pairs. The tower gave the signal. Power up. Tail lifts. The world smears into motion. Jack kept the throttle steady until the airspeed needle quivered past minimum takeoff, then eased back. The Mustang lifted as gently as a hand, rising from water. They climbed to altitude, leaning their engines just enough to save fuel. The sky above the English coast glowed pale yellow, streaks of sunlight rippling across a distant layer of cloud. Jack's oxygen mask pressed cool against his face as they formed up. Berlin was hours away. Rourke's voice broke through the static. "You nervous, Halverston? Only if I think about it." "Then don't think." "I'll try," Jack said. He scanned the horizon meticulously, eyes coursing across the distant haze for the faintest glint of danger. The squadron's mission today was simple: escort bombers deep into Berlin's industrial heart, but nothing felt simple anymore. Every time a crew chief mentioned 262s, the room fell quiet in a way that didn't feel like superstition. It felt like resignation. A new era had already begun, and the Allies were flying piston dreams into a jet-powered dawn. Hours passed. Ice crawled across the canopy's edges. Jack flexed his gloved fingers to keep feeling in them. Below stretched a world of snow-dusted fields and blackened craters, scarred villages crouched beside frozen rivers. War had stripped the color from half of Europe. When the first German flak bursts appeared ahead, black blossoms swelling in the sky, Jack's heart rate quickened. Bomber streams glittered like a scattered constellation, their contrails weaving white braids across the heavens. A dozen fortresses labored through the cold, engines roaring in steady rhythm as they carried their terrible cargo toward Berlin. "All right, boys," Rourke said. "Here comes the fun part." Jack tightened his harness and switched fuel tanks. He scanned left, right, above, below. Any moment now, the Luftwaffe would show itself. It came like a sudden storm. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," someone yelled. Dark specks materialized in the glare. Bf-109s slicing downward with predatory intent. Jack rolled instinctively, shoving the throttle forward as he angled to intercept. His Mustang vibrated with power. Engine note, shifting into a fierce howl. The first clash turned the sky chaotic. Contrails twisted like panicked serpents. 50 caliber tracers arced through the blue. A 109 streaked past Jack's canopy, so close he could see the pilot's white scarf whipping inside a cramped cockpit. Jack yanked hard, forcing the G-forces into his chest, rolling into pursuit. He lined up, squeezed the trigger, and the Mustang spat fire. The rounds stitched across the 109's tail, shredding fabric and metal. The German jinked violently, then dove away, trailing smoke. Rourke's voice broke in again, breathless. "Stay on the bombers! More inbound!" Jack pulled back into formation, scanning for threats. 5 minutes passed. 10. The air around them stank of cordite and burned glycol. A bomber limped below, with one engine coughing smoke. Then the call came. "Jets, 6 o'clock high, coming in fast!" Jack jerked in his seat. His eyes shot upward, scanning through the blinding sun glare. And then he saw them. Silver darts, sleek, predatory. Me-262s descending from altitude like metallic falcons. The flight commander cursed. "Keep them off the fortresses. Don't climb to meet them. Make them overshoot." But the jets were already closing. Their speed was unreal. Jack felt as though time itself bent around them. One 262 Dove straight through the bomber formation, cannons spitting molten red. A B-17's wing erupted in flame, shearing off in an arc of debris. The bomber fell away like a wounded giant, spiraling slowly, trailing black smoke that smeared across the sky. Jack swore under his breath. "Rourke, I'm going after that one." "Negative," Rourke shouted. "You can't catch him. None of us can. They're too fast." Jack knew he was right. Every textbook, every briefing, every veteran from the 9th Air Force said the same thing. You can't outrun a jet. You can't chase a jet. You can only ambush it. But the rage inside him didn't care. The helplessness, watching that bomber fall, burned like a brand. He slammed his throttle to the firewall. The Mustang surged forward, but the jet still widened the distance effortlessly, as if it cruised on rails of lightning. Unless Jack's eyes flicked to the small red guard plate beside his throttle. Under no circumstances operate continuously. Wet power, water injection. He flipped it open. Rourke's voice came through, urgent. "Jack, don't! You'll blow the damn engine." Jack tightened his jaw. "Then I'll blow it catching that bastard." His thumb pressed the switch. The effect hit instantly. A violent, guttural surge as the Merlin inhaled charge-cooled air and methanol-rich spray. Manifold pressure slammed beyond the safe limit. The Mustang leapt forward like a living thing, unchained. The speed clawed at him. The airframe shuddered, rivets groaning under the strain. His vision tunneled as acceleration pinned him deep into the seat. And the impossible happened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Me-262 stopped pulling away. Jack narrowed his eyes. Behind the fogging edges of his mask, the jet was still faster, still sleeker, still cutting the sky like a silver razor. But for the first time, its lead wasn't growing. It was shrinking, inch by inch, foot by foot. The pilot of the 262 must have noticed. The jet wobbled slightly, adjusting its climb. Jack stayed glued to him, the Mustang screaming in protest. Wet engine power forced more fuel, more air, more fury through the cylinders than any sane engineer would have permitted. But Jack didn't blink. The bomber crews who died in flames deserved at least this. The German banked hard right. Jack mirrored the move, teeth clenched, muscles aching against the G-force. The high-speed turn rattled every bolt in the Mustang's frame. Warning lights flickered angrily on his panel. "You're gonna kill yourself," Rourke yelled. "Back off." Jack didn't respond. He was locked in, pulse pounding like war drums. For one surreal moment, he felt the engine not as a machine, but as a partner. Roaring, trembling, giving everything it had. The distance closed. Jack could make out the jet's distinctive camo pattern, the streak of soot along its fuselage. 10 seconds more, and he'd be in firing range. But the 262 pilot knew it too. The German leveled out, then rammed his throttles wide open. The jet lunged ahead, abruptly accelerating into a realm Jack's aircraft couldn't follow, even with forbidden power pouring into it. The Mustang trembled as if in protest. Jack held chase for a heartbeat longer, then eased back, gasping for breath. The Me-262 vanished ahead, leaving only a shimmering wake in the winter air. He exhaled, long and heavy. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, like seeing a glimpse of a future that didn't belong to him. "Halverston," Rourke said, quieter now. "Are you in one piece?" Jack checked his gauges. Oil pressure wavered, but held. Cylinder head temps flirted with danger, but stabilized. The engine, impossibly, still ran strong. "I'm alive," Jack said. "Somehow." "Good, 'cause we're not done yet." Jack glanced behind. More German fighters, piston and jet alike, were circling the formation, regrouping for another strike. The bombers were minutes from their drop point. If the fighters hit them again, someone else would die. He pulled back into the fray, still shaking from the chase. Another 109 dove toward a B-17 with guns blazing. Jack cut across the bomber's bow, firing a long burst that slashed the German's path. The 109 snapped away, trailing coolant. A second enemy fighter skidded behind Rourke. Jack warned him, rolled into position, and fired again. His tracers found the enemy's wing route, and the fighter peeled away, smoke pouring from its engine. The sky filled with chaos. But slowly, inexorably, the German attack faltered. Jack's wild pursuit of the 262 had disrupted their first strike. The rest of the squadron fought like wolves, guarding their wounded pack. The Germans were fierce, but disorganized, desperate, and the 262 drivers, accustomed to blows struck lightning-fast and consequence-free, suddenly found themselves hunted instead of untouchable. Minutes later, the bombers released their payloads. Great black blossoms erupted over the industrial sectors of Berlin, smearing smoke across the skyline. The Germans broke off, some diving for home, some limping downward in flames. Jack's breathing slowed. The adrenaline seeped from his limbs. He switched the Mustang back to dry power, the engine sighing into a calmer rhythm, as though relieved it had survived its own fury. The squadron regrouped. 12 Mustangs had launched that morning. 9 remained. The return flight was quiet. The sky seemed too gentle after what they'd endured. Jack watched the clouds drift past, feeling a weight he couldn't shake. Rourke flew beside him, canopy glinting in the late afternoon sun. After a long silence, he keyed his mic. "Jack, what you did back there, that was Either the bravest thing I've seen or the dumbest. Jack gave a faint smile. My father always said bravery and stupidity make good neighbors. Your father ever fly combat? No, but he knew engines better than anyone. Then maybe he'd understand why your Merlin didn't explode. Jack didn't answer. He wasn't entirely sure himself. Maybe luck. Maybe engineering. Maybe the Mustang had simply wanted to survive. They reached the English coast as the sun dipped low, casting the sea in molten gold. Jack lowered his landing gear, flaps dropping with a metallic whir. The runway rose gently beneath him, and he touched down smoother than he expected, the Mustang rolling to a stop like a weary horse returning to its stable. Back on the ground, Jack climbed out slowly, legs trembling. A mechanic hurried over, eyes widening at the discolored exhaust stacks and the blistered paint along the nose. "What the hell did you do to her?" he asked. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. "I asked her for a favor," he said quietly. "She said yes." Rourke walked up, pulling off his gloves. "Command wants debriefs," he said. "They're asking who the idiot was who tried to outrun a jet." Jack nodded. "Tell them his name is Halverston." "And that he didn't die," Rourke added. "Yeah," Jack said, staring at the Mustang. "Tell them that part too." Night settled over the airfield as the wind carried the distant murmur of engines winding down. Jack stood alone for a moment beside the plane, tracing his fingers lightly along the warm metal of its nose. What he'd felt up there, the surge, the impossible chase, the glimpse of a new kind of war, lingered in him like a haunting note. Tomorrow, he knew, the jets would come, again. And next time, he wasn't sure the Mustang would forgive him. The wind screamed across the field all night, rattling tin panels on the dispersal huts and sending loose sheets of ice skittering across the tarmac like fleeing insects. Jack didn't sleep. He'd lain awake, staring at the cracked ceiling above his bunk, listening to the low hum of generators and the distant coughs of cold engines being tested by night crews. Every time he blinked, he saw the Me-262 streaking ahead of him, always ahead, just beyond reach, flashing in the sun like a blade. He finally rose before dawn, dragging his flight jacket over his shoulders and stepping into the freezing barracks hallway. Outside, the first bruised purple hint of morning touched the horizon. Mechanics swarmed the flight line under floodlights, their breath ghosting around them as they checked oil levels, cycled control surfaces, ran pre-flight tunes on engines that groaned awake reluctantly in the icy air. Sergeant Lewis, the crew chief assigned to Jack's Mustang, was already elbow-deep in the engine bay. Grease smeared both his hands, and a lit cigarette dangled precariously from the corner of his mouth. "You look like hell," Lewis grumbled, without looking up. Jack managed a tired grin. "Feel worse." "You almost cooked this bird yesterday," the sergeant said, tapping a wrench against a scorched manifold bolt. "I've never seen a Merlin come back from what you did to it." "Most Merlins wouldn't." Lewis paused, eyeing him. "Planning to try it again today?" Jack looked past him to the Mustang. Frost coated its wings in a delicate white sheen. The exhaust stacks had darkened to near black from the abuse. A faint smell of burned metal still lingered around the cowling. "I won't push her unless I have to," Jack said quietly. Lewis snorted. "That's what pilots always say." The squadron briefing was unusually tense. The room felt cramped, the stale smell of coffee and cigarette smoke clinging to every wall. A map of central Germany hung at the front, covered in grease pencil lines, red markings and small wooden blocks showing bomber positions. Major Carlton didn't waste time. "Intelligence confirms increased jet activity out of Rechlin and Brandenburg," he said. "We expect heavy fighter resistance, including a high likelihood of Me-262 interception. Your job is the same as always. Keep the bombers alive." His eyes found Jack across the room. "Some of you took creative measures yesterday. Headquarters has asked me to remind you that emergency wet power is for emergencies, not heroics." A few pilots glanced toward Jack, some with concern, others with something like admiration. Rourke, seated beside him, muttered under his breath, You're famous now, or infamous. Jack didn't respond. His mind was already in the sky. The morning mission launched under a sky thick with low cloud. The climb out was rough, patches of turbulence, jostling the formation as they climbed higher, finally breaking through into clear blue above the cloud tops. The sun washed everything in a cold gold light that made the Mustangs gleam like drawn swords. Rourke flew off Jack's wing again. "Today," he said through the radio, "we do this the smart way. There's a smart way now. There's always a smart way. The dumb way is what you did yesterday." Jack smirked behind his oxygen mask. "Dumb worked. Barely. Maybe this time we aim for a live, not legend." The flight settled into its escort position ahead of the bomber stream. The B-17s rumbled behind them in a steady procession, engines beating a deep, resonant thunder that filled the sky. The Germans wouldn't let them reach their target unchallenged. They never did. It didn't take long. The first fighters came out of the sun, FW-190s diving steeply, cannons flickering like angry sparks. Jack banked sharply, contrails whipping behind him as he rolled into the fray. The Mustangs met the attackers head-on, the air erupting with gunfire. Jack caught a glimpse of a 190 slipping onto a bomber's tail and dove, firing a long burst that tore half its rudder away. The enemy pilot bailed moments before the aircraft spun violently and fell into the cloud layer below. "More on the deck!" Rourke shouted. "Keep them off the bombers!" Jack pulled up hard, closing in on another enemy fighter when the radio crackled again, this time with a different tone, urgent, sharp, fear-laced. "Jets! High noon! Coming down fast!" Jack's stomach tightened. He looked up. 3 Me-262s dropped out of the sun like falling stars. "Break! Break! Break!" Rourke's voice barked. The jets hit the formation with terrifying precision. One bomber disintegrated almost instantly, the right wing shredding apart in a flash of flame. Another lost its tail, spiraling helplessly downward while its crew leapt into the void, chutes opening like fragile white blossoms beneath them. Jack's hands shook on the stick. The rage was instantaneous, a hot, sharp thing. He banked upward, trying to intercept a 262 as it streaked past, but the jet tore through the sky too quickly, nearly supersonic in its descent. Jack's Mustang couldn't match the angle, the speed, the acceleration. None of it. He felt that helplessness again, that hollow, gnawing void. "Halverston, don't chase. Wait for them to come around to climb," Rourke shouted. Jack gritted his teeth. He forced himself to breathe, forced the madness to settle. The jets climbed after their attack run, looping upward in a wide arc. That was the moment the briefings had drilled into them. Hit them as they climb. Catch them slow, catch them when they bleed speed. But these 262 pilots were experienced. They didn't linger. They returned for a second pass faster than any previous attack Jack had seen. Tracers flashed past his canopy. One jet swept across Rourke, missing him by inches. Another fired at a B-17 so close that Jack could see the muzzle flashes reflected on the bomber's aluminum skin. "Jack!" Rourke's panicked voice burst through. "Behind you!" Jack rolled instinctively as the third 262 swept down on him. He felt the air compress, felt the terrifying closeness of something far faster than any piston engine should ever contend with. The jet overshot him, barely, but not cleanly. Its wingtip clipped Jack's slipstream, sending both aircraft wobbling. The 262 recovered instantly, rocket-like in its acceleration. But for a precious second, just one, Jack had the angle. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the throttle forward and flipped the wet power switch open. The Merlin's scream changed pitch, a guttural, violent roar as water injection poured cold density into the desperate cylinders. The aircraft surged, gauges slammed into the red. The Mustang lunged forward with a hunger that terrified Jack even as he embraced it. Rourke shouted something over the radio, but Jack couldn't hear it, couldn't hear anything. The engine drowned out the world. The chase was pure instinct, pure fury, pure madness. The Me-262 fought to climb, nose rising slowly, engines blazing. Jack closed the gap again, not as quickly as yesterday, but enough. Enough to taste the impossible once more. His sight reticle drifted onto the jet's fuselage. His hands steadied. He fired. The tracers stitched upward in a bright arc. The first burst missed. The second clipped something. Jack saw a small panel shear away from the jet's tail. The third burst struck true. A puff of black smoke erupted behind the 262. The jet jolted. For the first time since the new war in the sky began, Jack saw a Me-262 struggle. Its climb faltered. One engine belched a streak of flame. The jet rolled left, sharply, almost uncontrolled, trying to recover. Jack didn't let it. He fired again, long, controlled, merciless. Bullets hammered into the jet's left engine. It exploded in a flower of orange fire, ripping open the nacelle. The Me-262 tilted violently, losing altitude fast. Its pilot bailed out an instant before the aircraft nosed downward, vanishing into the cloud deck like a dying comet. Jack exhaled shakily. His heart pounded so heavily it hurt. He had done it. He had killed a jet. "Holy hell," Rourke whispered through the radio. "Jack, you mad son of a—" "You got him." But Jack wasn't celebrating. Not yet. His engine was overheating. The temperature gauge trembled past limits it had no business exceeding. The airframe vibrated violently, the controls stiff from the strain. He eased the throttle back to dry power. The Mustang shuddered, coughed, but did not fail. "Jack, say something," Rourke said. "I'm still here." Jack whispered. "Barely." The squadron regrouped around the surviving bombers. The German fighters, demoralized by the loss of their jet cover, pulled away. Anti-aircraft fire took over as the bombers neared the target city, but the worst was behind them. Jack's legs shook so badly he could hardly keep them braced on the rudder pedals. His gloves were soaked with sweat. "Let's take them home," Rourke said. It was a long flight back. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving Jack drained, hollow, trembling. His vision blurred at times. He forced himself to stay alert, scanning the skies. But the Germans didn't return. Not today. Hours later, they broke out over the English Channel. The relief was so powerful, Jack felt tears sting his eyes. He landed hard, bouncing once on the runway, before settling. When he rolled to a stop, he didn't move, not for several seconds. The canopy fogged with his breath. Lewis climbed up the wing, pulled open the canopy, and stared at him. "Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, what did you do this time?" Jack managed a weak laugh. "The same stupid trick." Lewis looked over the engine cowling, noticing the fresh scorch marks, the blistered paint, the trembling metal around the exhaust. "If she were human," he said softly, "she'd never forgive you." Jack nodded. "I know." The debrief was a frenzy. Commanders demanded details. Pilots crowded around. Jack answered questions mechanically, replaying every second of the chase, the climb, the kill. "You're the first Mustang pilot from this group to down a jet," a major told him. "Do you understand that?" Jack did. And yet he felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and a dread he couldn't explain. That night he sat alone beside the Mustang under a star-strewn sky. The aircraft rested silent, its metal skin catching moonlight in pale silver glints. Jack placed a hand on its nose. "You saved me again," he whispered, "but I don't know how many more times you can." He heard footsteps behind him. Rourke approached, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold. "You did something impossible today." Jack closed his eyes. "Feels like I stole something. Borrowed time." Rourke sat beside him on the wing. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Rourke spoke softly. "Those jets, they're the future. We both know it. But until that future fully arrives, we've still got work to do." Jack nodded slowly. "And after what happened today, you think the 262s are done with us?" Rourke's expression was grim. "No, I think you painted a target on your back the size of Berlin. Jack looked back at his Mustang, battered but unbowed. The future was coming fast, faster than any propeller could hope to match, but not today. Today, a Mustang had outrun tomorrow, and tomorrow would have to answer for it. The wind clawed at the P-47's canopy as Howard rode the turbulence down toward the broken ribbon of coastline. Smoke smeared itself across the horizon, thick, rising columns that told him the battlefield below had only grown more vicious. In the minutes since his duel with the FW-190, his wounded jug vibrated with a deep, mechanical groan, as if resentful that he kept demanding more from it, but the engine still held, the wings still held, and that meant he still had work to do. He pushed the control stick forward gently. Even that soft gesture forced the aircraft to lurch. His hydraulics were still gone, and gravity was doing most of the flying now. Howard gritted his teeth and wrestled the wings level. Beneath him, the patchwork of war sharpened into brutal clarity. Scorched French farmhouses, craters spreading like open sores across the landscape, a convoy of German trucks slithering down a narrow road like a steel-scaled snake. The radio crackled. "Any Thunderbolts in the area? This is Viper 2. We are taking fire and need immediate support." Howard recognized the voice. Miller. The kid sounded breathless, strained, as if every word was squeezed out between bursts of panic. Howard keyed the mic. "This is Iron Hand 1. I hear you, Viper 2. What's your position?" "North of St. Pierre, 2 miles out. We're pinned by an armored column. We've lost Mitchell. McRae can barely keep his ship together, and we—" A barrage of static drowned him out, but the desperation carried through. Howard didn't hesitate. He shoved the throttle forward. The jug coughed once, then roared like a wounded predator forced back into the hunt. The German convoy ahead was moving fast. Howard judged their spacing. The lead truck towing an anti-aircraft gun, followed by troop transports, then 2 armored cars. It was a long line. Too long for one damaged Thunderbolt to handle. But he didn't need perfect runs. He only needed impact. He descended through a cloud of oily smoke and angled to intercept, the ground rising toward him. At this altitude, the smell of burning fuel and soil felt almost close enough to taste. He lined up the shot, eyes narrowing down the gun sight. The K-14 gave him no help, not with the instruments so rattled and the aircraft shuddering beneath him. So he trusted his instincts. He squeezed the trigger. The jug answered with its signature ripping fury. 8 .50 caliber Brownings opening up like a choir of thunder. The recoil kicked the aircraft's wounded frame, the wings vibrating under the concentrated storm of lead. His rounds stitched across the armored cars. The first erupted in a blossom of fire. The second swerved, its driver probably blinded or dead. He pulled up hard, harder than the damaged hydraulics wanted to allow, and the aircraft protested with a deep, metallic groan. Howard forced it higher, feeling every broken nerve of the machine. Miller's voice burst through the radio again. "Beautiful hit, Iron Hand. They're pulling back from our position." Howard steadied his breathing and circled. "You still airborne, Viper 2. "Barely. McRae's leaking fuel like a sieve, and I'm out of ammo. We can't stay up much longer." Howard swept his gaze across the countryside. More enemy movement stirred in the east, additional trucks, and, worse, the rhythmic black pops of flak starting to bracket the sky. He felt the odds stacking against them like stone on stone. Then his engine sputtered. Once, twice, a cold current knifed through his spine. He checked the gauges by instinct. The oil pressure was dipping fast and the temperature was rising. He'd pushed the jug too hard after the duel with the 190. He'd known the engine wasn't happy, but he needed these minutes, and he was running out of them. The third sputter lasted longer. Too long. Howard looked toward the coastline. Still far. Too far for a glide if the engine quit now. But the American lines weren't impossibly distant. Maybe he could ditch near them. "Viper 2, he said quietly but firmly. "Fall back toward the shore. I'll cover what I can." "You're on fire, Iron Hand," Miller shot back. "I can see smoke trailing from your cowling. You gotta break off." Howard's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A thin, wavering line of smoke trailed behind him, dark against the late afternoon sky. He ignored it. Below, the German convoy was reorganizing, angling toward Miller and the surviving P-47. If they reached that small ridge ahead, they could bring their guns to bear and finish the job. Howard dropped the nose of his failing aircraft and dove once more. The flak intensified. Black blossoms erupted around him, each one a violent punctuation mark against his reckless descent. Shrapnel rang against the fuselage like hail. One burst struck so close, the shockwave slapped the jug sideways, nearly flipping it. But Howard held his line. He felt the engine choking beneath him, each coughing rotation threatening to be the last. The wind screamed through the bullet holes in the wings. The canopy rattled under every jolt of enemy fire. He aimed at the lead truck, the convoy leader, the one controlling their movement. He fired again, short bursts this time, conserving what little stability he had left. Rounds punched through the truck. Flames burst from the hood. The vehicle careened sideways, jackknifing across the road and blocking the other transports. German soldiers spilled out, scrambling to set up new firing positions. Howard wasn't done. He swung around and strafed them. One pass, two passes, each time feeling the controls weaken, becoming mushy beneath his hands. One of his guns jammed. Another sputtered empty, but the remaining barrels still spat fury, forcing the Germans to scatter. Miller came over the radio again. "McRae's turning west for the line. I'm right behind him. Iron Hand, you need to pull out." Howard exhaled slowly. "Copy that, Viper 2. But he didn't pull out. Not yet. The Germans were retreating just enough for Miller and McRae to clear the field, but a third enemy armored car was pressing forward from behind the trees. If it reached the roadblock, if it regained maneuvering room, it could track the retreating thunderbolts and cut them down before they reached their own lines. Howard saw this, and he understood. He leveled the jug for a final run. His ammo count was nearly gone, only a handful of rounds left in the surviving guns. Not enough for damage, but maybe enough for fear. Enough to force a delay. The engine sputtered again, then backfired with a violent crack. His propeller wavered, slowed. Too close to fail now. Howard gritted his teeth, whispered, "Come on, girl," and pushed the throttle one last inch. The jug responded with a strangled roar, barely maintaining forward momentum. He charged at the armored car, guns blazing in ragged bursts. The Germans dove for cover, not because of the damage he could inflict, but because a plunging P-47, even a dying one, was a terrifying sight, barreling toward them with unmistakable intent. The armored car halted its advance. It swiveled its turret toward him. But too late. The jug was already streaking overhead, its shadow cutting across the soldiers like a blade. Howard pulled the stick back, forcing the aircraft to climb, just enough to clear the ridge. The engine seized. The propeller froze. Silence swallowed the cockpit, except for the thin whistle of wind past the canopy. A silence so sudden, so absolute, it felt unreal. Howard kept his hands firm on the controls. Without power, the jug felt heavy. An immense, metal-clad bird, struggling to glide with clipped wings. He scanned the ground ahead. Fields, trees, a few narrow dirt roads. No flat surfaces, no clearing wide enough. His altitude was bleeding fast. The coastline shimmered in the distance, like a memory. A voice echoed faintly in his helmet. Miller yelling something, but the radio washed it into static. The world narrowed to the fading sky and the broken earth rushing upward. Howard leveled the wings, picked the least lethal path, a long field partitioned by hedgerows, terrible options, but the only ones available. He angled for the gap between two hedges, his pulse steadied with soldierly calm. He'd trained for this, planned for this, and yet no amount of training ever matched the reality of a powerless dive toward unforgiving ground. The Jug clipped the first hedgerow with its left wing. The impact snapped the wingtip clean off, sending the aircraft spinning violently. The cockpit shuddered with earth-shaking force as the fuselage slammed into the field. Dirt exploded in all directions. The P-47 skidded, tore through the soil, the world whipping past in a blur of brown and green and fractured sky. The canopy cracked, the nose crumpled, metal screamed, then everything stopped. Silence again, this time thicker, heavier, as if the world itself held its breath. Howard's head hung forward, and blood trickled down his temple. For a moment he was suspended between consciousness and dark, his ears filled with a distant ringing. He forced his eyes open. Smoke seeped from the ruptured engine. Flames licked the edges of the cowling. The heat grew quickly, climbing from uncomfortable to dangerous. He needed to move. With a groan, he threw his shoulder into the cracked canopy. It resisted. He kicked it, shoved it again. It snapped loose with a brittle crack and fell to the earth outside. Howard dragged himself out. His left leg screamed with pain. A sprain, maybe a fracture. His ribs hurt with each breath. But he made it onto the field's uneven ground. Behind him, the Jug began to burn, fully. Bright flames curling around the engine, swallowing the cockpit he'd just escaped. It was strange, watching the machine he'd fought, bled, and survived with dissolve into fire. Like watching a trusted friend die. Voices echoed in the distance. German. He turned his head, saw figures approaching from the tree line, weapons drawn, silhouettes stark against the burning wreck. Howard limped forward. He didn't get far. His leg gave out and he collapsed to one knee. The Germans shouted, closing in. For the first time since the hydraulics had failed, since the duel with the 190, since he'd chosen to dive back into the fight, despite every warning from fate. Howard felt fear. Not for himself, but for the men he'd protected, for the mission, for the war still raging around them. A machine gun burst rattled from the west. German soldiers ducked. 2 fell. Another burst, and more gunfire answered from the hill. Howard blinked through the smoke. American helmets, infantry pouring through the hedgerow, rifles raised, shouts carrying across the field. One of the sergeants yelled, "Cover that pilot! Move! Move!" The Germans scattered, some falling, others fleeing back toward the woods. The American squad surged forward, firing in controlled bursts, sweeping the field. Howard lay back on the grass, exhaustion flooding through him. The battle around him blurred as a medic knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "Lie still, sir. We've got you." Howard exhaled slowly. The sky above him was streaked with smoke and sunset, but beyond the haze, he saw a sliver of clean, open blue. A peaceful sky. One he hoped he might fly again someday. Bootsteps approached. Heavy, urgent. "Someone get his dog tags checked," the medic began. But Howard lifted a hand, shaking his head weakly. "Major Howard Dawley," he murmured. The medic blinked. "The Howard Dawley." Iron Hand. He glanced back at the others. "Boys, we got ourselves a damn ace." Howard managed a faint smile, but his eyes drifted toward the burning P-47. The fire crackled louder. Then the ammunition began to cook off, sharp pops echoing across the field. The infantry ducked reflexively. One of them whistled low. "Hell of a landing, sir." Howard's chest rose and fell with a shallow breath. "Any landing you walk away from," he rasped, "is a good one." They laughed, a shaky, relieved kind of laugh. The medic wrapped a bandage around Howard's leg and motioned for the stretcher bearers. "We need to evac him now." As they lifted him, Howard's gaze drifted upward once more. The sky wasn't quiet. Not yet. In the distance, he could hear more aircraft, both Allied and enemy, still locked in their endless struggle. War was a storm with no quick end, but Howard also felt something else, a pull, as if the sky itself was calling him back. He didn't know whether he would fly again. His wounds were real. His aircraft was gone, his future uncertain. But he knew this. He'd done his duty. saved his men, fought with everything he had, even when stripped of the very tools that kept him alive. And as long as there were pilots in the air, as long as the Allied lines pushed forward inch by bloody inch, he would never truly leave the fight. The stretcher-bearers carried him toward the waiting medics. The burning jug lit the field behind them like a pyre. Howard closed his eyes. For the first time in hours, maybe days, he allowed himself to rest. Howard drifted in and out of consciousness as the medics carried him toward the field station. The world around him swayed. Blurred silhouettes shouted orders, the distant rumble of artillery. Yet, beneath the noise, there was a strange calm settling inside him, as though the crash had shaken loose every last thread of fear. He had survived. Miller and McRae had survived. That was enough. At the aid tent, the doctors worked quickly, cutting away his flight suit, checking his leg, wrapping his ribs. One of them muttered, "Lucky he didn't burst into flames in that wreck." Howard didn't bother correcting him. Luck had nothing to do with it. Skill, instinct, and the jug's indomitable frame. That was what got him here. Miller burst into the tent minutes later, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Sir, McRae's safe. We made it." Howard managed a tired grin. "Told you I'd cover you." Miller hesitated, then stepped closer. "They're calling it in, sir. Command says your actions broke the convoy's advance. You saved half a battalion." Howard looked away, embarrassed. Praise never sat well with him. "Just did my job," he said softly. Outside, the sky thundered with more P-47s climbing into battle. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.